Yeah, hi, this is Martin from the photoacademy.eu, and this video tutorial is about layers in Photoshop or Photoshop elements like I use here. So this is a beginner video, and that's the reason why I use elements. It only costs $100. I think this is a good amount of money for what you can get. And you have an organizer, you have different effects you can use plugins and everything, so this is a good program for beginners, and this is the reason why I use it for this video tutorial. But the most of the things I talk you even can use in Photoshop, the big brother. Yeah, layers. What are layers? What can you do with layers? Why is it better to work with layers instead of using a filter directly on the image? And this is what I want to show you. At first you can of course use effects on the background layer. Even this is a layer, but this is the background and you have a lock on it. Normally it's not possible to change things of it, but you can. Yeah, you can use a filter, and we can go into, let's say, adjustment, just to show you. Okay, so when we're done, but we don't like it. Of course, you can go back in your history. This is one opportunity, but you can see I have a bit of history steps here already because I worked a little bit only to show you. And you, let's say, save 20 history steps. But if you're using brushes or painting with something, clone stamp tool, of course it's very little if you only have 20 steps. So this is not the best idea to work directly on this background layer. You can use a layer copy of this by doing this on this little icon here, drag and drop, and you can get the second layer. Or you can use Control or Command J and you have another layer as well. And on this layer, if we go back to this effect, more so that you can see it, I now can take a look on the before and after. I can delete this layer without touching the background layer, and I can change the opacity. So let's say I want to have a saturation, but not in the amount of 100%. I can go down, let's say to 20%, and I can take a look on the before and after. This is one good point for layers, to work with layers. You have before and after, and you can change the opacity of the whole effect. Then you can create another layer. If you say this image is a little bit too flat, you have blending modes. and you can create a contrast by using overlay, soft light, or even hard light if you want to, depends on your layer. The other ones are not that good, but the first three, overlay, soft light, hard light, are very good to use for contrast if you want to push the contrast. And you can go down with the opacity as well. So that's very nice and fast way to increase the contrast. You can sharpen. So let's take a look. Yeah, I think it's okay for this video with this settings. So now you even have sharpening on a second layer. You can take a look on the before and after, and if you think it's a little bit too hard, change the opacity. And of course, if you double click the word, you can give your layers a name so that you know if you have many of them what's going on there. Okay, now I know this is the sharpen layer. You can use adjustments on them. Let's say if you want to go into the levels, for that you don't need this, of course. It's only adjustment layers. Can kick the contrast by using this levels. Have the before and after. Can push it even more, maybe not that much. And we can change the opacity as well. But I want to show you another thing. By increasing contrast of an image, you change the saturation. And if you don't like that, or if you have problems with some things, if you're using contrast styles by using levels or something, then you can go down to luminosity, change the blending mode of this layer, and maybe you can see it in the video. Here the greens are more saturated, as well as the blue of the sky here. But if you go into luminosity, you keep the color of the original image and you're only increasing the contrast. This is another reason why it's good to use layers. You can do more than only one thing. And here you have the mask. A layer mask is very important. Everything you do to the image you can delete by using a layer mask. Of course, you have the eraser tool. You can erase stuff. So if we copy this layer, let's say I don't like this area, you are cutting a hole into your layer. I can do this the same by using a layer mask. Here I have no chance to go back. These pixels are gone. But if I use a layer mask instead, and I can do the same. We create a layer mask on this layer using the brush tool. You can pick it or using the shortcut B. And now I'm changing my colors to black with the opacity of 100%. Now I'm doing the same. I'm cutting a hole into the layer, but I can go back. White means nothing. Black means everything is gone. And all grays in between. Doing steps to your layer mask. So from black to white you can have different grays instead. So if you only want to cut out something by 50%, you can do this. So if you have different colors to play with from black to white. By holding down the Alt key and clicking on the layer, you can take a look what you have done to the mask. And you can see here, this is black, like a 50% gray and 20% gray. What it's doing. So back to our adjustment layer. Let's say I don't like what it's doing to my blacks, but I like what it's doing to the sky and other areas. I can go into with my brush, and now I use 50%. And I can paint with black. To get some of the very, very dark areas back, so that I can see more of the structure in the blacks and not a big black spot. This is another good reason to use layer mask. And by the way, for working with layers I recommend using a tablet, so it's more accurate to paint and it's more normal to your hand using a pen. Now if we hold down the Shift key, clicking on the layer, we can enable or disable the effect of the layer mask. Now we have the layer without the layer mask, and now we have back some of the details in the black. And I can delete this layer, I can paint over it, I can paint much more strokes. You have fill layers as well. You can take this color and use it. And another way is working with filters. That's very useful on the second layer. So if you have a layer copy, you can use a filter on it. Like if you want dust and scratches, it's very helpful to use this on the second layer as well. You can use plugins on second layers, and you have all these opportunities blending modes, opacity, and stuff like that for your image. And as I said before, very useful for me, sharpening. There's a sharpening on it. Down with the opacity a little bit. Works great. If you don't want that color shift, go down to luminosity as well. That's very helpful if you're working with sharpening. If you blur the image, you can use color instead. For some areas, it's good to get rid of noise. And another way to sharpen an image is if you go into your filters, others, high pass. It looks strange to you, but if you take a look on all the small details, you can adjust the radius of this high pass filter. I think this might be good for the video here so that you can see it. And now you go into, let's say, overlay or soft light, and you sharpened your image. This is another good way to sharpen images. So you have 3 ways to sharpen images. Some filter, others high pass, or you have the unsharp mask or the adjust sharpness. So these are good ways to sharpen images. For some images I only use high pass. It's a little bit more accurate, and because of what it's doing to the layer, you see which details you sharpen. So this is one reason why I like this process with the high pass. You see what's going on, and doing this on the different layer, you have the chance to go into it, say, want to use soft light, and with an amount of 60%, I want to sharpen this image. So you see that you have many ways to use this. And another cool way is if you take another layer, you use, let's see, convert to black and white. And with this black and white layer, by using overlay, soft light, hard light, mostly soft light, you also have the change to increase the contrast of the layer. With the layer level, you have an overall contrast, but if you use black and white, because of the sliders you have, the adjustments of the different color channels, you can separate the contrast to special colors. And this is much better in most cases to increase contrast by using a black and white layer and the blending mode, soft light or overlay, it doesn't matter. It's overlay is just harder than soft light. This is the only reason. But sometimes it's more powerful to use overlay because you need a lot of punch, and if you don't, you use soft light with a little bit of opacity. So this is also a good way to do something. Fill layer. You have a lot of reason. Oh, I missed something. Sorry. First, you're doing a new layer. Bring it up one step. It's not that important, but it can help you. Use a fill layer, and here you use 50% gray. So now you have a gray. And if you're now using overlay or soft light, you have your image back because 50% is not doing anything to your image. It's like the high pass layer. It's working with 50% lighter and darker to the contrast edges. Same with the fill layer, 50% gray. You now can dodge and burn. Using your brush tool, you can see it here. If I use black, or if I change my colors, I can paint with white to lighten areas. So I only use the keystroke, and I can lighten and darken areas of my image. Even in the clouds, it's good to use black sometimes. Can darken down the whites a little bit, and then of course you change the opacity every keystroke, but just for the video so that you can see what's going on. You can doing dodge and burn to a separate layer with 50%, and why I use 50% is you're able to see what you have here. So if you're going back to normal, you see your painting. If you only use 10% opacity or something like that, which is good for dodge and burn, on the empty layer you can't see that 10% that much. So this is the reason why I often use a 50% fill layer, so that I can see even 10% changes, or if you're painting with 8%, I can see it. It's hard to see on the empty layer, this little stroke. So this is the reason why I use a gray fill layer. And of course you can change soft light or overlay. And yes, I want to delete this. And on a fill layer you can also, if you use grain quite often. So we can go into our filters and we can say add noise, monochromatic, Gaussian, and a good amount so that you can see it in the video. Now if you use your layer blending modes, you can put grain onto your image. Mostly it's better to use soft light, and mostly I like to blur this a little bit so that it looks more like film grain, especially on black and white layers. And you can see I can change very fast the taste of my image. And now I can have a black and white layer or black and white image, or I can have a contrasty color image. It's very cool to play with layers, layer styles, fill layers, blending modes, opacity, layer mask, if you're using layers. And especially if you want to cut out something out from the layer, don't use the eraser tool. Use a layer mask on the second layer instead and paint with black. That's more accurate because you can change this. You can bring stuff back. You can paint back things with white. You can cut with black and save areas with white. So even if you have a stroke that it's going over the edge, you can use white and paint it back. That's more powerful than using the eraser tool, cutting a hole. If you have a hole, you have no chance to go back and bring the pixels back to life. Yeah, this was a little bit longer video about layers, but for all you beginners with Photoshop, or the little advanced folks, some tips maybe to you. Yeah, I hope you like this. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Goodbye.